Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. Well, hello. It is June the 30th, and I hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. All right, now I have a few comments and questions to cover in this video, which I enjoy doing, and I always welcome people to write in questions either by posting your question as a comment, or you can email me directly at searchforsigns@mail.com. And I always try to answer the question in the next video. So if you do post a question, just listen to the next video, and that's usually where I answer it. All right. So let's get on into it. Now, I do want to point out who this gentleman is in the background of this video. His name is George C. Marshall. And I love this quote: "The only way human beings can win a war is to prevent it." Now, you can't see it because I cropped the photo, but he's actually a military guy. So even, he was a general. He was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during World War II, talking about preventing war. So he wasn't a war hawk by any stretch, but he was. He eventually became the Secretary of State of the United States, and under his inspiration, guidance, and leadership, the United States came up with the Marshall Plan. That's why it was named for him. And right after World War II, the United States gave the excesses of what it had with the Western European nations to help rebuild Europe after the total destruction or near destruction of World War II. And had the United States not done that, we'd be probably living in a totally different world right now, because Europe would probably still be trying to rebuild from that destruction. I mean, it was decimated, right? And there could have been a lot of lawlessness, a lot of, anarchy and war that could have even happened amongst Europe had the United States not jumped in and tried to rebuild it so quickly. And it was a process that, and the Marshall Plan didn't happen for very long. It's not an ongoing thing that's even going on today. It just happened for a little bit. But the long-term effect of it was that not only did it rebuild the United States' economy, and it totally rebuilt Europe, we trust those nations more than we trust any other nations on the planet now. And a lot of those nations, like Germany, we had just gone to war with them. And then other nations like England, who were our allies during World War I and World War II, but we had a long history of not liking the English either. And now we trust them better, and we have more of a peaceful relationship than we do with any other nations on the planet because of that. Now, the other thing, so that was one long-term effect. Now, if what I'm saying is right about Maitreya being who I think he is, and the masters coming back into the world, and again, I'm presenting this information for your consideration, and you can believe it or not or whatever. Now, I believe that when we look back at this time, we're going to look at the Marshall Plan as actually, because, how do I put this? One of the prerequisites of the Christ being able to come back into the world was that the principle of sharing had to start at least governing the minds of the world leaders. And this was back in the 40s when Maitreya made that announcement. And so I think we will look back at the Marshall Plan as really helping to save the human race, because if Maitreya could not come back because the principle of sharing had never taken place, we'd be living in a much sorrier place right now, but we'd be endangering of ending life on this planet. So Maitreya says that sharing is the only way to create justice, and without justice there will never be peace, and if we don't establish peace, there will never be a future. But it will be a role model for our leaders in the very near future about how to create sharing, the principle of sharing, and establish sharing around the world. So that's just my 2 cents. Anyway, all right, let's get on into it. First question comes from Rick. And Rick, I apologize. Remange? I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. I do apologize, Rick. Rick asking, does Maitreya have any preferences to cremation versus in-ground burials? Has been some debate in our Catholic family. Thank you. All right. Rick, Maitreya hasn't really spoken on it himself, but the masters have. The sanest and most sanitary way of disposing a body that's no longer needed after death is to cremate it. There are several examples, but two that come to mind. Cancer and tuberculosis are two very, very, very ancient diseases that keep coming back into existence because of the way that we bury our dead. And so tuberculosis, for instance, was actually a punishment that was put on humanity back during the latter part of the Atlantean times because of how materialistic humanity was at that time. I think one master, the master DK, put it as, even unto their last breath, the people were thinking about gaining more material goods and material, possessions and so forth, even up to their last breath. So, but had humanity for the last 100,000 years since the destruction of Atlantis, cremated the dead, we would not have tuberculosis today. We would not even have heard about tuberculosis. But it keeps recycling itself back into our water supply, into the food chain, and so forth, because we, it could be anything from planting vegetables, where, there was a dead body and then it circulates into the vegetables there, or it could be, the vegetation, and then an animal eats it, and then another animal eats it, and then through the food chain, we eat that animal and that had tuberculosis. It could be anything, it's really hard to tell, but it is the sanest and most sanitary way of disposing of bodies. And then eventually, I know the masters will be advocating that we just, follow cremation as a method. It's not just Catholics, but there's other people who believe that you have to bury the body, or, it's bad for the person who died, but we're not the body. We're the soul. So the body doesn't really matter. Once you're dead, the body's, that's it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like trading in a new old car for a new car. It's not you, so. But anyway, thanks for the question. All right. Now, the next comment comes from David O. Bernie Sanders promises free things. That's why the younger generation wants him. I've been working since I was 7 years old. These damn kids today don't want to make sacrifices and work. They just want free beep at the expense of taxpayers. David, you are sounding more and more like my grandfather every single day. Now, the funny thing, the reason I'm laughing at what you're saying, I'm not laughing at your comment, but is, in spite of the fact that I know all about this information, and I know all about what's lying ahead for the future generations and stuff, I still have this thought from time to time from working with the young of today. Now, if I can just comment on a couple things about this, is first, the generation that's coming in today, they're wired differently than you and I are wired. They're coming in direct response to the new energies of Aquarius, sharing, brotherhood, cooperation, synthesis, and those kind of things. And it looks very different than what we were used to. They don't have the drive a lot of them don't have the drive to get promoted or the ambition to get promoted. They don't have the ambition to make a lot of money. They just want to spend time and have the time for themselves. Now, there's a lot of good to that, but they also maybe are ruminating and wasting that time too. So, because they're not educated properly on how to do it. They're the first generation really to start this whole thing. The masters will be teaching not only that generation, but even the older generations like you and I, how to spend our leisure time. It's very important that we as a species take time for ourselves to develop. We're not workers. We're not worker bees, And because of the technology, because of robots, and eventually, I think because of the massive unemployment and so forth, that's probably not going to go very far, go anywhere and so forth, that humanity is going to have to look at ways of keeping people alive and keeping people well, in the face of all this stuff. So the masters see that the best thing is maybe 18 to 20 hour work week, that you can get everything done if you work hard enough and still have time, much more time for yourself. And in the future, it's going to be about self-discovery. It's going to be about service to humanity, being creative, those kind of things. But also, one of Maitreya's big priorities, not top priorities now, because we have things we got to put in, do first, right? Like establish peace and so forth, justice, trust among the nations. But eventually, the trust among the nations will be so real that we won't need visas or passports. We can just travel from point A to point B. Now, each country will still have its own identity. It'll still be its own country, but the peoples can travel amongst those nations very easily. You don't have to wait in line, get you stamped, get you, what do you declare and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, it's a big part of the future because, not only will the travel be easy and fast and smooth and relaxing, but it will also bring people together where xenophobia and prejudice and those kind of things amongst other, and even just fear of, the unknown of another country will be gone. People will explore the whole planet in the way that, all of us will, not just the elite and the rich. All of us will be able to explore the world in a way that we couldn't up until now, or up until the future, that kind of thing. But that's, but the younger generation is wired and has the equipment and the knowledge and the understanding and everything, and the experience even though they're young. Yeah, there's reincarnation. They're reincarnating too, to handle the problems that face them. And one of the big things that they're going to be establishing for the future generations is more of a leisure time. But like I said, the masters are going to be teaching us how to spend that leisure time wisely. Because none of us have really been educated on how to use our leisure time. We use it selfishly, really. So eventually in the future, we'll be using it to benefit the human race. All right. Jerry, I'm going to skip over your question because I asked you if that's okay, if you could email me the link that you're talking about. Don't post it as a comment, because all links that people put in the comment section go right to my spam folder. That'd be great. All right. Now, I have a couple questions about John Hallett. All right. First one comes from Stephen Eaton. I remember hearing Benjamin Creme talk about this guy years ago, then nothing for years. Apparently, he has done TV interviews, but I've never seen him. Now I'm seeing videos about a new king of England, John Hallett. Crazy times. Is there footage of this so-called Maitreya? Well, I'm sure there is, but he's not going by Maitreya. See, the different quality between Maitreya and others who claim to be the Christ is Maitreya is not claiming to be the Christ. The truth of the matter is those are names that we've assigned him. He only views himself as a teacher. But Stephen, and I'm trying to think who the other person was Jenny. I think you guys both asked the same kind of question. So I'll kind of combine it together. If you were to go to Hyde Park in England and walk around for an hour or two, you'll see people that think they're the Queen of England or the King of England or whatever. And I'm not saying that this John Hallett wasn't supposed to be the King of England. I mean, really, Queen Elizabeth wasn't supposed to be the Queen of England, but her uncle advocated the throne, and for a woman, or she would have never been the Queen of England. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know the history of the royal family well enough to know whether this guy should have been the King of England. He'll never be the King of England. I pretty much tell you that. I mean, it's not like the Windsors are going to say, sure, no problem. That's you. You got it. You know what I'm saying? So I would pretty much, even though somebody's claiming, even though they might even have the absolute birthright to claim to be the real King of England, it's I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a non-starter issue as far as I'm concerned. Now, in terms of him claiming to be the Christ or people thinking he's be the Christ, well, I mean, it's for your consideration. I mean, if you believe that, then believe it. I don't believe it for 1 second. But Maitreya being, and this goes back to your question, Stephen, about is there any footage of Maitreya? Well, the reason why there's no footage of Maitreya is because he's not claiming to be even Maitreya. He is claiming to be nothing but a average person. So that to me is what resonates in my heart, that there's truth to this. If Maitreya was out claiming to be the Christ, I would have been so turned off about it years ago. There would be no Search for Signs YouTube channel. I'd be off doing whatever, cutting my grass, not even thinking about any of this stuff. Now, there's a reason why people more and more think that they are the Christ. And there's a purpose behind it. And I read an article, and I have to find it again and reread it, about the false Christ, and Benjamin Creme's master wrote about it. And it's a way of getting information about the return of the Christ in a very secondhand kind of way. And there is a purpose behind it, is and I was quite surprised when I read that article, because I was thinking he was going to talk about something totally different when I read the title of it. But when I started reading it, I was like, whoa, that's deep. I never even thought about it like that. So, you know, there were supposed to be 5 people that were going to come out, 4 other people along with Benjamin Creme, that were going to come out at the same time that Benjamin Creme made the announcement about Maitreya being back in the world and so forth, or coming back in the world at the time. Benjamin Creme was the only one that took on the task. The others either didn't believe it, but the one in Tokyo was a woman, and she actually believes that she's Maitreya. And I think I've seen her videos on YouTube where people, worship her as Maitreya and so forth. But she was actually one that was supposed to come out saying that Maitreya was back in the world. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. But yeah, I mean, and I know Benjamin Creme used to say that people used to come to his door all the time saying, no, the one you're talking about, it's not the Christ, I'm the Christ. So, and I've even had some people at some of my talks. There was one guy I know the way I remember right off the bat, he had red hair and he was sitting in the back of the room and he had this real frown on his face, and I was talking about Maitreya, and then at the end he stood up and he goes, I am the Christ, come back. So it happens. So anyway, but like I said, I mean, I'm just presenting this information that's come my way for your consideration, Stephen and others, and you can either believe it or not. And if you believe this Joseph Gregory Hallett is the Christ, then more power to you, So anyway. All right. Next question comes from Peter Miller. Why are inhabitants of Venus, Mars, Saturn, etc. hiding from us Earthlings? I don't think they're hiding, Peter, from us. They're on the higher levels of physicality of the etheric planes. We just don't have the sight to be able to see it yet. They have to lower their vibration down for us to see it, and they do it all the time, and that's what we're starting to see. When we see these UFO videos and so forth, or see evidence of it in crop circles and those kind of things. But I don't think they're hiding from us at all. Now, you have to also think, too, that they operate within the same law of harmlessness as these masters do. So, for eons, we thought we were alone in the universe, right? And now, but the truth of the matter is we aren't. Now and it goes hand in hand with, the masters coming back in the world. We thought we were at the top of the evolutionary food chain on this planet. There was no other kingdoms above the human kingdom, right? Well, that's not true either. So these masters coming back into the world, these space brothers and sisters, showing their ships and so forth, is a way of waking us up to the fact that that's not true. You know what I'm saying? So eventually in the future, we'll have the sight to be able to see the etheric planes, and we'll know for a fact, but there's always this element of doubt. And they do it that way in order for us to use our own intuition to whether it's true or not. And then if we don't believe it, that's fine too, but the truth of the matter is that they are there, but they're not hiding from us. They are showing us in their own way to wake us up. And I do think that that's working the way that they've been doing it, because I remember, if you just go back in time, to the late 70s, and if you were to see a video on TV about a UFO, the way that these videos on YouTube have been showing up, people would have freaked the F out. You know what I'm saying? And I remember talking about UFOs with classmates in school and how, they were real scared about it and this, and now it's kind of like a mainstream kind of thing. It's not, not everybody really believes it. Not everybody knows where they come from. Not everybody knows what their purpose is to coming here and so forth. But for the most part, you watch a video on YouTube and you might even think that it's totally true. And does it really freak you out? Or is it kind of like, yeah, of course, So it's becoming more and more and more of a normal, it's being normalized in a way. And eventually, after the masters are out, known for who they are, they'll start to introduce us to the fact on a global scale that, yes, these space brothers are here, and yes, they are beneficial to us, and yes, they've been helping us, and they're here on a spiritual mission, and they've been helping us since the beginnings of humanity on this planet, and our relationship is not ending now. It's going to be deeper and deeper and broader far into the future. They'll be our mentors too, along with these masters. We have the brotherhood amongst all these planets and these hierarchy. We don't really understand the true relationship that we have with all the humanity on all the planets. But eventually it will be truth. It will be known to all of us. And that's one of Maitreya's big jobs is to introduce us to the fact that there is life on other planets and it's been there forever, and they're here helping us and so forth. Hopefully that helps. All right, next question. I see you, do you see me? What do you say about a man who claims to have come before God? Well, who's claiming that? I would say they're probably delusional. Now, if you're talking about Maitreya, you don't really put his name in there, so I'm just I'm not assuming anything. I'm just gonna try not to assume. So, if you were saying that Maitreya is claiming that he came before God, he's never made that claim. So, he's saying that we are all equal sons of God, sharing the same divinity. It's the divinity that we share that's been there. The creation of the universe. I think Peter Miller asked this question a few videos ago about what is the master's view on the creation of the universe and so forth. Was it the Big Bang? Well, I remember my mom used to always ask when I was young, like, what if the Big Bang did exist, what is it expanding into? Well, that space is the absolute reality. So consciousness comes and goes, is moved, moves around and so forth, but the absolute reality does not change. It's not affected. It can't be affected by it. And even when you think you get to the end of it, there's still something beyond it. That's part of it too. It keeps going. So no one's, I guess the true question is we were all here before the creation of the universe, and we will all be here after the creation of the universe, but it is not the personality. It's who we are at the core of our being, which is the self, is really what it is. So, but anyway, I don't know if that answers that question or not, but if I didn't answer that question and you're asking something different, I see you, do you see me? Please repost your question and I'll do better the next time. All right, and then Jenny, I kind of combined yours with somebody else's question about Joseph Gregory Hallett. So hopefully I answered that question for you too as well. All right. I always like to end on a high note. I'm a musician by trade, so you always want to leave on a high note, not a low note. All right. And I think you can't get any higher than an idea coming from one of these masters. And I love to read Benjamin Creme's masters' articles. And they're compiled in two books. One's A Master Speaks, Volume 1, and the other one's Volume 2. And it is, again, always better for you to read it yourself versus somebody like me reading it to you. All right. So if you are interested in it, definitely check it out on Amazon or Share International's webpage or whatever like that. You might be able to find some of these books. But in the meantime, I'll read you a bedtime story. The Ending of War was published in March of 2006. When the time comes to count the cost, men will be amazed at and ashamed of the waste of war. More than any other activity of men, war eats greedily into resources and lives. Nothing is spared in the effort to overcome the enemy. Everything is sacrificed to the attainment of victory. Thus has man waged relentless strife against his neighbor, and not always in self-defense. As often as not, war has been used for the expansion of territory, the accumulation of plunder, or, most abhorrently, the capture of slaves. The, quote, spoils of war, unquote, is a phrase used lightly to describe the underlying purpose of most wars. Today, we have reached a time when men must take seriously the task of ending war. Men must understand that there is no problem or situation which needs war to solve or cure. This being so, the nations must together act and end forever that destructive aptitude of men. Should they fail to do so, they threaten the very existence of the race. Peace is no longer an option for men. They have now in their hands the deadliest weapon of all time, which, if used in a major war, would desecrate the planet and leave it lifeless for eons of time. Why then court such disaster, such an end? Maitreya, you may be sure, will speak thus on his emergence. He will show men that small wars can lead to terrible consequences, and set men on the slippery slope of self-destruction. He will counsel gravely and turn men from the unthinkable. Be vigilant, but not afraid. Trust Maitreya to wisely guide the actions of men. Play your part in the task of educating your brothers and sisters, and so make lighter his burden. Tell all who will listen that the expected one is here, ready to begin openly his mission, that he relies on the men and women of goodwill to work with him for peace and justice, freedom and love. Tell them this. Tell them that Maitreya has the simple answer for the world's woes, that sharing will engender the trust that will open the door and the hearts of men to blessed peace. Then will you see the flowering of the human spirit in brotherhood and cooperation. Then will the problems and blockages melt away, overcoming in overflowing goodwill. Thus will it be, and thus shall we witness the end of the abomination of war. Such is Maitreya's purpose, and firm is his will for its accomplishment. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.